Hello, and welcome to The People's AI, presented by Vana. I'm your host, Jeff Wilser, and today we are going deep into the very lifeblood of AI, the fuel that powers AI, data. AI, quite simply, does not exist without data. It doesn't get good without good data. It doesn't get great without great data. You often hear the catchphrase in this space, data is the new oil, and I don't think that overstates the case. Now, currently, there are two very, very big problems with AI data, and they're almost two different sides of the same coin. Problem number one, we have no idea, for the most part, of how the open AIs of the world, big tech, centralized AI, are getting their data. Some of it surely is legal, like out there in the open, books that are in the public domain, sure. Some of it, well, less clear, a little more legally vague, gray area to be generous. This is why you have, for example, lawsuits from the New York Times against OpenAI. Now, I can speak to this personally. I am a book author, and when a database was revealed of authors' books that were used to train AI, two of my own books were on it. This is a bit chilling and, okay, honestly, a bit flattering, but this is happening all the time. Creators' works are being used to train AI, whether they like it or not, whether they know it or not. Many see this as exploitative and fundamentally unfair. Problem number two, AI companies are running out of data. Put simply, all of the low-hanging fruit has been plucked. Most of the internet is already hoovered up by ChatGPT and Claude and Groks of the world. A good chunk of the books that have ever been written, they're already in the mix. And the concern is that if the data pipeline slows down, then AI improvements could plateau. Enter Vana, which has an elegant solution that cracks both of these problems simultaneously. So Vana's mission is to create an ecosystem, a marketplace, an infrastructure for user-owned data. The premise is simple. You own your own data. You really do, whether you know it or not. And instead of AI companies leeching data from you without your consent, the idea with Vana is that you can effectively sell your data in a way that preserves your privacy thanks to the magic of blockchain and get rewarded if it's used to make better AI. This also creates a mechanism for AI projects to get higher quality data that they never would have access to before, truly a win-win for all. I first spoke with Vana's co-founder, Anna Kazlauskas, last year when writing an article for CoinDesk. My first thought, and this is way before this podcast, is that she is brilliant and that Vana is fascinating. I'm glad we got to hear from her on the debut episode of People's AI alongside Ilya from Near, but I sort of selfishly wanted a second one-on-one conversation that goes deeper into why data self-sovereignty is so critical and what specifically Vana is doing to solve the problem. I really enjoyed this conversation. As you'll see, Anna's goal isn't just to make data training more equitable or more just, although that's of course a big part of it, but also to responsibly, fairly use that data, harness that data to build AI that's not just competitive with centralized frontier models, but 10x better. So for now, please enjoy my conversation with Anna Kazlauskas, co-founder of Vana. Anna, welcome back to The People's AI.
Great to be here, yeah.
Let's start with the big idea. What exactly does data sovereignty mean and why does it matter?
Yeah, so I think that most people don't conceive of their data as their property, right? Most people think of it, they probably don't think about it that much. And then if they think about it at all, maybe they think about it in the context of like their information that sits with these different companies. And so in an AI native world, data really is this core asset, which is fundamental to everything, right? If AI needs to get better, it needs better data. And so data is becoming increasingly important. But there aren't really ways of having direct ownership of your data today. So what data sovereignty means is that you have self-sovereign ownership over your data, which means you control where it goes, you control like the keys that basically permission it out, you earn as it's used. I think there's a good analogy to be made relative to even like land ownership. Like farmers in some areas, they didn't own their land for a long time, right? Like they didn't even know what that concept was. Like you just farmed the land and then you like gave it some percent of sort of what you made to the government or whoever was ruling. And when you actually did have very good land ownership rules in place, farmers became a lot more productive from like an agricultural perspective, right? And so I think that the primitives around data that exist today don't really allow for that like true ownership or true sovereignty.
Right.
But you're able to build really incredible AI models, AI agents, applications, if you can have access to sovereign user data while kind of empowering the user through that information.
Is the idea that users don't currently own their own data, but should, or that we actually all do own our own data, and therefore we have the right to harness that data for AI?
That's a very important question that most people get wrong. So we actually all legally own all of our data today.
So I'm worried that like I'm the old school farmer renting land. Oh, I thought, okay, I'm giving my data to Amazon, to Reddit, to Facebook, and I kind of feel a little bit helpless. And what you're saying is actually we legally do own it. And so part of this is about asserting that right and claiming the data we actually own.
Exactly, yeah. So in the same way that when you put your car in a parking lot, the parking lot doesn't own your car, right? They can't do whatever they want with it. They can't take it. They can't take the parts, etc.
Yeah.
You can always get it back. It's the same thing when you put your data in a platform. So it's still legally yours. You can get it back anytime. When you check the terms of service box that says agreed, you're granting them a permissive license to do things with your data, for example, operate their platform and put your data inside of it. But yeah, kind of users actually have very strong legal rights over their data, which most people don't realize. And I think honestly, most like Web 2 tech giants don't want you to realize because that is more advantageous to their current business model. So yeah, you have full ownership today.
Let's connect the dots now to get from this idea of why data sovereignty is so important, and then kind of Vana's North Star, Vana's core thesis on connecting that data that we already own and how it relates to building better AI.
Yeah, in terms of why data sovereignty is so important, you can kind of look at it through two lenses. Like one is from a user perspective and one is from a developer perspective. From a developer perspective, like I used to train AI models and just always wanted like more and more data, right? And so, and often what I would see is like some of my friends who were amazing like AI research people would go and work at like Facebook or the big tech companies because that's where the data is, right? That's where you can do interesting stuff in today's world, right? So in a world with sovereign data, anyone can access that data while preserving privacy and kind of having other guarantees we can get into later without necessarily having to be within the big tech company or whatever else that has that data, right? So as a developer, it enables all sorts of new applications, both like training better AI models, like making smarter AI agents, and also applications on kind of the data portability side of being able to build, say, like a very personalized health application that has your sleep data, your Strava data, your nutrition information. Usually as a developer, it sort of feels like if you want access to that data, you have to build within the company's ecosystem, right? So if I want to build an app that consumes Spotify data, I need to go through the Spotify like OAuth process and get permission from Spotify, right? And Spotify is an interesting example because their API terms actually don't allow you as a developer to work with the data for the purposes of AI. But in a world with self-sovereign data, it's up to the user to decide, right? Because it's actually not Spotify's data, it's the user's data. And so in that world, you can, build some kind of like generative music platform that's based on the past music that somebody's listened to and different applications like that, where it's a lot more of this like open design space for a developer. So that's the developer side of it. On the user side, I think that a lot of it comes down to kind of seeing data as capital, right? Where I think there's a lot of fear related to AI today, right? Which is, well, what could it look like if AI gets much better and kind of like replaces all knowledge work, right?
Sure.
And I think what a lot of people don't realize is that your data is what makes AI possible, right? And so if you have good attribution, where if you've taught the AI how to code like you, right, or how to write like you, and you own it, then it's really just about scaling yourself, right? And so then you don't have this same kind of like labor displacement issue. It's more of a tool that is owned by the people who contributed the data in order to make the AI possible.
It almost aligns incentives, if I hear you right. It's almost like if you truly link AI's development to the quality of your own data and your data's role in growing AI, you're almost rooting for AI success. You're like, the better AI gets, the better I am doing.
Exactly. Yeah. I think it's really like it's a market failure problem right now where there is no market around data. It's just a very hard thing to build a market around because of the privacy implications, right? Where if I give you my data, how do I know that you haven't used it? We call that the double spend problem for data, similar to the double spend problem that Bitcoin solved. If you have that problem solved, which we do at Vana, then you can actually make like a liquid market for data and then solve that market failure.
That is such a revolutionary way of looking at it. Now, I guess here's where kind of it's like there is also a bit of a leverage and scale question here, right? Because it's if only one person said, it's my data. I'm like, well, sorry, Jeff, we have data from many people. We don't really need yours. But if everyone bands together and says, hey, we are withholding our data unless you agree to our terms. So talk a bit about the importance of kind of like marshaling individuals together to en masse respect the sanctity of his data, almost like a data labor union, right? One worker can go on strike and nothing happens, but if all the auto workers go on strike, Ford has a problem.
Yeah. It's always kind of this collective action problem, right? Where like an individual user has very little power. Like I personally will request my data and I like ask questions to the different companies about, I was trying to export my Rewind data, but they encrypted it in some weird way. But anyway, like as an individual user, you're basically just going to get the basic legal rights, which is you get back a copy of your data within 30 days. Like there are sort of timelines on which you should get it. I think it would be much better if you had full API access. That I think we're starting to see in the regulation in Europe. I think that could come to the US at some point. But it is still negotiating from a place with much less power as an individual user versus if you have a large group of users together, one, they have a lot more negotiating power because there's a group and they can sort of put out asks of, hey, these are the terms of service we would want to see, or this is how we would want this to work in a better way. And they have a lot more influence because they are this larger group acting together. Second is that when you have that data that's pooled, you're able to train an AI model on it, right? Like just my data is not that great for AI training. Like I could maybe fine tune a model and make it slightly more like me. But if you have a large group of people who've all contributed like audio data, video data, text data, then you have access to enough data to be able to train a better AI model.
I want to in a bit get into more the mechanics of Vana and kind of how Vana is actually functioning now to make that reality happen. First, tell me a little more about your origin story. You mentioned earlier that when you were training, when you were working on AI in the early days, you're like, I need to get more data, more data. Talk a little more about your early days developing AI and the early inspiration of Vana.
Yeah, so if we go way back, I got interested in programming actually through graphing calculators. Like I was just like making games on graphing calculators and learned to code
TI-85?
that way. I think TI-84, and then I'm pretty sure at some point I got like the more advanced TI-89, but it wasn't as good for code. So then I stuck with the TI-84 for coding.
Nice.
Yeah, I should actually I must have that somewhere. But yeah, I think that's actually a pretty good way to learn to code. I don't know if, probably people just can use like Cursor these days or whatever.
Right,
you can just use an AI. And then I became really interested in economics and like economics research through reading The Economist and kind of like other kind of relatively mainstream like economics publications, and then learn about like macro and kind of like monetary policy, and became really interested in central banks and specifically them controlling interest rates as a way to kind of manage the economy. And then Janet Yellen was chair of the Fed at the time, and so she became like my role model. Put a picture of her up in my dorm or in my like high school bedroom, and it was just like, yeah, this is it. I want to be chair of the Fed.
As we all do.
Yeah.
As we all do. We all have our Janet Yellen photo.
Yeah, people love Janet Yellen. I mean, maybe. And then I ended up like working at the Fed in high school, doing research, and the sort of research I was doing is I learned this programming language called Stata, which is essentially like a statistical modeling language. Okay. And it's kind of like R or Python, but basically you're like training really small AI models that are just these statistical models trying to better understand data about humans that are, you're kind of like modeling the labor market. Went to MIT to, I thought, go into economics, do a PhD in economics eventually, and then become chair of the Fed. And then that first semester, one of my dorm mates was like mining Ethereum, and he started bringing me to the MIT Bitcoin Club. I learned about it. I was like, this is so cool. Like, I started mining as well, and just got so fascinated with the idea of being able to run basically a distributed central bank, like from my dorm room, right? I was like, everyone all around the world is like running these computers, and like that has created a currency. Like, that is so cool. And the currency is programmable, right? And you can do kind of like different things on top of that currency. So that is what led me down this like decentralization kind of like interest and rabbit hole. And I think I was also interested, like I've love just freedom and like self-sovereignty from a personal perspective. Like, I just really value that freedom. And so I saw that like financial piece as very much the ability to give people back that freedom. Like, I spent some time in the Ivory Coast in Africa explaining like Bitcoin to regulators. And it was so interesting to hear about people who like really wanted access to a stable currency and didn't have it. And the level of freedom that crypto brought them was amazing, right? They never had the ability to have a stable currency or sort of like self-sovereign digital money in that way that they could send across borders. So that is sort of like the beginnings of a lot of the crypto interest and sort of self-sovereignty interest. There were a few projects at MIT at the time. There was Solid project that was basically doing, it was started by Tim Berners-Lee, the creator of the internet, kind of a new way for people to store their data in a fully self-sovereign way. And then, so rather than having the company you store your data with, you store your data and then different developers can access it. It's a pretty academic project, hadn't seen a lot of adoption at the time, but is, I think, what shaped a lot of my early thinking. And then I started wanting to train better and better AI models, essentially to use for econometrics, for modeling economic data.
Okay. This is obviously way before it was cool, right? You were clearly clear from your story. There's the... You were not motivated by the sparkly chat GPT hype train. This could not be any more of a stark contrast from that, right? When someone is building AI models for economic utility, that tells me, okay, they actually care about substance and use cases. So go on. Just wanted to
totally.
underline that point.
Yeah, no, it was not cool. It was like a lot of linear, it was a lot of math. I mean, it was cool to me, but not to most people. Yeah, it was called like natural language processing at the time, was kind of like that field. And the attention is all you need paper had come out, but people hadn't figured out how to use it for generative models. And I would actually always ask my professor, I was like, when will this be able to generate text? Like, how far out are we? Like, what is blocking this? And I actually would still email her like every like year or two and be like, so do you think it's going to work for generative stuff yet? And now I think we're 8 years later and it works, right? And so that has been really cool.
That is just to connect some dots here. You had the clarity 8 years ago. You saw that paper that obviously our friend Ilya was worked on, and you had the prescience that, okay, it's clear, like this can work, this can happen. Like, what it's only a matter of when. Do you have that same clarity? Do you have a sense that, okay, the roadmap is very clear that we can marshal and coalesce individuals to bring their data together in a way that is useful to train AI that's actually going to compensate users and benefit them and do it in a way that preserves their privacy and dignity and autonomy, really. So you're going to have that same like loud ringing bell that this is what's going to happen?
Yeah, so I think that with the AI piece, it's purely a technical question, right? Where it's, okay, if you scale this up, how could this work, right? And so I think that in the context of Vana, from a technical perspective, yes, right? And a lot of that is built. Yeah. The one thing I would add is that it is also a large-scale adoption problem, right?
Yeah.
Where it is a collective coordination issue of like, how do we bring a massive number of users, their data, kind of developers interacting with that on board? And so it is much more of an undertaking than, well, actually, I wouldn't say, it was a massive undertaking to create generative models, but it is less of a coordination problem. But I mean, at a high level, like, yes, and it feels very inevitable. Like, same with just like the market failure for data. Will at some point we see data futures, data perps, like actually just more liquid markets around data? 100%. Like, I think that's inevitable. And that's really where like where we've positioned Vana to be that foundational economic layer for data. So it's also really interesting, I think, where maybe over the past 6 to 12 months, a lot of people have had more of this realization around kind of like data and decentralized AI and what's possible. And I think as a founder, often you're like living in the future, right? Where you're like, oh, like obviously this is going to happen, right? And so that's been true to me for so long that it has kind of been this weird moment where I'm like, oh, okay, like now everyone like is kind of on this page. So now let me like share 2 or 3 years out, right? Now let me start talking about kind of these new financial assets you can build on top of data. So that's kind of this interesting shift for me as a founder. And it is, kind of, you often end up kind of living a little bit in the future, and then you got to make sure there's kind of like a bridge from present to future so you can bring everyone there.
Let's get more into Vana, and we can get as in the weeds as you'd like. Can you describe a little more detail how the model works? I think I completely get philosophically the importance of data, and that Vana helps users use the data they already own, helps them be compensated for the data. If the data is used to train AI, they benefit, their aligned interests. Talk a little more though about actually how it works. What are the mechanics? How are tokens involved? How are DAOs involved, right? So if AI models get bigger and better, how do I connect this financial data that I gave 18 months ago, and now there are AI models that are making great economic forecasts or financial forecasts based in part on that data? Like, how do the actual nuts and bolts work of that?
Yeah, so when you connect your data to Vana, essentially what you're doing is, in the same way that you can kind of put funds in your crypto wallet, you're putting your data in your wallet, right? And so then you are going to sign transactions to grant access to that data.
So and like a spreadsheet is being uploaded, or like a database being, what is the actual data transfer?
Yeah, okay, so we could go into exact mechanics. Okay, so you are uploading your data or granting API access, so then it would be the API key that's getting uploaded. Okay. Encrypting that with a key that you control, which is a derivation of your private key, so that you can have kind of granular access, but encrypting it with a key that you control, and then writing or saving that to storage on the network. Vana is storage agnostic. So we're not a storage platform. There are a bunch of different storage options. You can use like Google Drive, Dropbox, IPFS, S3. So you save your data in storage that you control as a user, or you can opt for kind of like a hosted option. And then you write a pointer to that on chain. Okay. That is just adding your individual data. So once you've done that, you're able to kind of access the full data portability across Vana. So you can log into any application, grant access to your data, have it kind of personalized based on that information. What most people use Vana today for is for data DAOs, which are these applications that are possible to build on top of Vana because of some of the core kind of like privacy and like data as an asset type primitives. So what you do when you join a data DAO as a user is you are granting access to the DAO to make decisions about your data and everybody else's data who has joined. And in exchange for that, they are giving you a data token, which is essentially like a share of ownership in that data set.
So the more data I give, the more tokens I get. Is there kind of a weighted equivalency, like almost like a price or a market value of the data you give?
Exactly, yeah. So that happens through proof of contribution, which is mapping everybody's data, which is necessarily non-fungible, right? My data is different from your data. To a fungible asset, which is the data token, which is a tradable kind of like asset. So
that's clever.
They do it in different ways. Like each data DAO implements it differently. The 23andMe one implements it kind of equally for each person. The Reddit one does it based on the square root of your karma. I think the Spotify one might do it based on how much music you've listened to. And so they sort of use these different things like that basically map to, okay, overall, how much data are you adding relative to other people? One like nuance I would add there is that sometimes it actually depends on who has joined before you, right? So if there is already another user who tweets a lot like me, right? And I'm joining the Twitter data DAO, then, okay, the marginal value of my data is actually not quite as high. Like the perfect proof of contribution is basically measuring the marginal value of someone's data. You have to approximate that in some ways. So yeah, that's how it works.
The users, once they've entered an arrangement with the data DAO, or once they, cool, here's my data, go forth and train awesome AI. If the AI gets better, and if that succeeds, we actually did build a better 10x better version than kind of Google or OpenAI's frontier model. How does this user eventually benefit from that? Is there a way in the token structure, the DAO structure, or is there a vision for what's the vision for how cool the stupid little things I wrote when I was in 5th grade? For some reason, someone wanted that. How do the users down the road get kind of benefited from the better AI that's being built?
Yeah, so when you connect your data in and you get these data set specific tokens, those data tokens are actually what's used to access data. So when a developer is accessing data, they are burning that data token and Vana. I think in the future, we will also see AI model specific tokens that have some relationship to the data token, right? Because you could have 3 different AI models like trained on the same data set. And then what you can do is, so every time the AI model is used, you're burning that AI model token and then making sure that basically value flows back to the original data contributor.
Interesting. Okay. So users, the most common way this is working now is joining data DAOs. You mentioned Spotify, Reddit, 23andMe. What are some other examples of some of the data DAOs? Give the listeners a sense of the variety of different types of data.
Yeah. Okay, so I think there are now around 20 that are live on mainnet, and then there's a whole batch. There are like several dozen that are getting close to launch, and like several hundred that are kind of like in testnet in some way. So and a few others I'll mention: Amazon data, which includes your like consumer purchase history. The reason why that's a really interesting data set is so many companies, like large retailers in the US, are very threatened by Amazon, right? And if they had the opportunity to buy data of, hey, what are my customers buying from my competitor, right? What should I be stocking on my shelves that Amazon is selling to people instead? That is really valuable information to them. That's a simpler AI model. It's more of a consumer insights type problem. So yeah, Amazon. There are a couple of kind of like DeSci, like decentralized science related ones. So there's a biohacker DAO, which is focused on sleep data. There's another sleep one called sleep.fun, which is kind of more like competitive type sleep one. And they support a bunch of different kind of like sleep applications. I think if you have a Garmin, an 8 Sleep, like a bunch of other ones, you can use that. There is, actually there are 2 23andMe ones. One of them is focused on more like collective action around 23andMe, where their goal is to at some point buy 23andMe the company, which is a very ambitious goal, I will say, make it user owned. The other one is focused specifically on cancer research and kind of using the 23andMe genetic data set, augmenting it with other information to be used for cancer. I have a wish list of data DAOs too, if people are trying to think about what to build. I'd love to see more in the robotics space, because I think that there's a huge demand for like robotics data right now. I was talking to a like robotics company that actually they bought a maid company just for the purposes of having them wear cameras to like collect more data to train AI models on. And so, yeah, I feel like there's a lot of demand for robotics data sets. There aren't actually that many voice ones right now. That would be kind of interesting to see. Yeah, there's a browser extension, YKYR. I love that. Yeah, they're also really fun to build. I wish that I could clone myself and just build data DAOs, but I can't. But yeah, it's like really amazing to kind of like see people's creativity.
What's your gut along those lines of what is one of the types of data that is most fruitful for AI development? What do you think, like these 3 or 4 categories, this will really move the needle when it comes to building better AI?
Yeah, a lot of it comes down, it comes down to what is AI not good at today, right?
Yeah.
So, and then how does it need to learn from that? This is a little bit of a niche area, but I think is actually very important. There's not really a great 3D type model yet, because a lot of the 3D data from like games and stuff like that is proprietary, right? So like game studios don't make their assets public. So I think that's like a pretty specific research type problem. The way I think about it is, okay, if you think of all the data in the world, mostly what AI is trained on today is public data. So that's data that is available on the public internet, mostly text data that's kind of like mid to low quality. So I think that very high quality text data, like DeepSeek showed actually that if you have much higher quality data as a starting point, they had like literally PhDs generating like high quality reasoning data of like math and coding. you can be a lot more efficient with data too. So yeah, I'd say there are aspects of quality, there are aspects, and it's actually it's a very hard question to answer. And the way we solve it at Vana is by creating a market that solves this problem, right? So we create the environment so that there is a market that says, this is the most in-demand data, rather than directly saying, this data point is worth like $100.
You said a couple of things earlier I want to circle back to in this realm, one of which is privacy, and one of which is the scaling problem, the collective action problem, the kind of like, how does this get mainstream? And I'm guessing the folks listening to this podcast, the folks going to ETH Denver, the folks going to DevCon, they might already get it. That, oh, okay, sure, this is blockchain based, there's cryptography, privacy preserving. So when I give my data, it's doing so in a privacy preserving, maybe the ZK proofs might be involved, right? The average normie has no idea what I just said was ZK proof, right? The idea, and the idea, there might be a lot of, I'm guessing here, there might be a lot of hesitation and lack of trust to say, sure, I will give my data to this data DAO. I don't even know what a DAO means, the normie thinks, right? So I don't even know what the DAO stands for. How are you kind of thinking about that almost education challenge, or how do we get folks outside of the kind of decentralized AI world, the crypto AI worlds, to get comfortable with the idea of giving access to your data to these DAOs and connecting this really lovely idea that you articulate really clearly about why your data you own it and you should benefit from it. How do we get your average folk to take the steps necessary to make that a reality?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is kind of like a product UX question, which generally crypto is not that good at, right? In terms of like bringing people in, because you have to have a wallet and stuff like that. So I think that some of the data DAOs, I mean, they're building their own kind of like UI and way for people to contribute their data. Something that we're looking at right now is kind of having an optional kind of unified UI for users to be able to connect a bunch of their data in to kind of like a single place and contribute it to data DAOs via like a more seamless UI. But I think a lot of it is like a product question and kind of like a trust question of like, how do you build a great experience for somebody to both understand what's going on, but not be inundated in what's a non-custodial wallet, what's non-custodial data. And so, yeah, I think actually there are a few things, like even wallets have come really far, where now just being able to have a sort of like single sign-on feeling wallet where you're like logging in with Google or makes a wallet, I think that makes a big difference. I think it's still super early in terms of what is possible in terms of building a great crypto product. So I think that honestly is like a point of friction today, but is getting better and better. I think that it's also about sharing the context of like why it matters for somebody, of like what is the thing they can do that they couldn't do before, right? Someone isn't going to be like, wow, like I really want to use this product because I love self-sovereign data. Like I might, but like almost no one is going to be like, oh, like I love self-sovereign data. I'm so excited to use this. They're like, what is the thing I can do?
They all have Janet Yellen photos in their room, and God bless them. They're great, but we can't count on them for mass adoption. Yes.
So like and like I think we have to be reasonable too about, even I am like not going around day to day being like, which product can I use that's ideologically aligned, right? I'm like, what does this solve for me? So I think that with data DAOs, it's actually really important that they are showing users what that is in the context of, we pay you for your data, right? You get ownership of this AI model, of this data set.
That's not a bad slogan, by the way. That is very direct.
It's good. You know, it's sort of like very clear what the thing you could do that you couldn't do before is. I do think that there's a little bit of a sentiment shift where people care more about kind of like data privacy and ownership. Like we saw this with DeepSeek, where at least for the hosted version, people were asking like, where's my data going? Right? Yeah. And I would say 5 or 10 years, like people really wouldn't have asked that question, right? And so I do think that AI has made it a lot more top of mind for people. And so I think that is a really helpful kind of like tailwind, but ultimately that's not going to be enough of a driver.
Yeah. And it dovetails to a post you made a while ago on Twitter or X, that for decentralized AI to work, and I'm paraphrasing here, jump in if I get this wrong, we can't just win on ideology. we have to win on actual capability, on substance. Am I warm on that?
Exactly. Yeah, 100%. Right. I feel like everyone is, yes, we want like broadly the power of AI to be decentralized. We don't want like a single company owning this all powerful AI model. Like we want to create a world where AI, the power of it is distributed among many, and kind of we don't have a world where a single company determines truth of kind of the AI model, right? We want to have a group input and also have the economic benefits of AI shared very widely, right? I think that if you went to most people today and you're like, hey, do you want to own a share of ChatGPT in exchange for, I don't know, some of your data in a privacy preserving way? I think most people would be like, yeah, actually, that would be great. Yeah. Like people are kind of scared of OpenAI and kind of being replaced by it. So I think that broadly, like there's a huge amount of energy that's gone towards decentralized AI, right? And sort of like, how do we take crypto economic primitives, just cryptographic primitives, apply them towards AI? But the question that we have to answer as like a decentralized AI kind of group of builders is, what is the thing that we can do better using decentralization that you can't do in a centralized context, right? Because we can't rely on just like, oh, people are going to use this because it's more decentralized. Like that has pretty much never, like this is extremely unlikely unless there's some censorship thing. And so I think that like our view is that data is really the fundamental piece of that, where you actually have huge gains from decentralization because you can kind of skip over the walled gardens of big tech, right? Nobody in the world today has a data set which has users' email data, like Gmail data, iMessage data, Instagram data, Amazon data, all connected across users, right? Amazon, Google, Apple, and like Facebook aren't going to collab to make that. One, there are like legal reasons they can't connect it across users, and just from a commercial perspective, it's very unlikely. But users actually can, right? And so we have this window of time where like users actually have the upper hand because data is so important to push that AI progress forward. And so, yeah, we have to kind of like take advantage of that moment, right? And use this moment to bring data out of walled gardens, put it in a self-sovereign context where users control it with their wallet, and then kind of lay that foundation for what I see as the original promise of of crypto, right? It's this user-owned internet. It's this truly like self-sovereign, like digital world where we get to exist and thrive kind of in this AI world where we actually own it.
I love that. And that is an amazing segue to my final and maybe the most important question to kind of unpack and explore here is where this is all headed. And I don't mean just like the next couple of months, but ultimately if Vana's mission succeeds. I know that means self-sovereign AI and self-sovereign and user-owned internet, but I guess I'm thinking with respect to the AI systems, I'm curious of the end game of how this works. One thing we kind of discussed a bit off mic before we started was I could see that it's clear in kind of short to medium, and not to minimize this is a big challenge, not to minimize this, but the idea of a data marketplace to help users say, okay, here's my data. I'm going to sell it more or less at a fair rate to AI company X, maybe the X is a bad acronym. It's an AI company such and such, and that will fairly train AI. But it sounds like you have an even grander idea and ambition that these different data DAOs and all these different data pools can kind of like join together almost Voltron style to create a decentralized, fueled AI frontier model that's competitive with the billionaires are doing. Am I going the right direction here? And if so, kind of talk about what that vision could look like.
100%. Yeah. So I think within like open source and decentralized AI, often we are just in the mode of playing catch up where we're like, hey, let's try to meet the benchmark or let's get to 90% of what the closed AI labs have. Right. And I'm just like, no, like, how do we make it 10x better? Can we be more ambitious? Like, and so, but also you have to be tactical about that, right? Like, how do you make it 10x better? In the context of Vana, if you have the most data and the most high quality data kind of overall aggregated, you can build the best AI model, right? And there are obviously like research questions to think about, right? That's not just, oh, if you get the data, suddenly it happens overnight. That's like a massive undertaking. And we have folks like my old MIT professor, who's kind of like our principal AI scientist now, like he makes sure that, okay, if we have that data, you actually can build the best AI model.
There's no magic wands. Exactly. It's actually, there's a lot of research.
Several year undertaking. But the important part of it is, it's not just saying, hey, let's get some data and make a fine-tuned specialized model. Although I will say that is, you can build very, very valuable specialized models. I think that if you look at, okay, what is the value of AGI, right? What is the value of an AI model if it actually is able to be the best in the world at doing, and we saw this like OpenAI's revenue last year, it's like $3.4 billion. Like you really, these foundation models create a huge amount of kind of like economic value. So it's very natural to be like, all right, if you have the most data, let's build the best AI model. And so that's actually one of the guiding use cases we've designed around, right? How do you get 100 million people who all contribute data from 5 different data sources to actually train a better foundation model than any other company out there, using the unique access to data that's on Vana? And sometimes I guess maybe like one technical detail. So most people, when they say train an AI model today on data, they might just be talking about fine tuning or kind of like that later stage, maybe RLHF, but you can do full pre-training, right? Where you're actually building an AI model from scratch. And that is what, so Flower AI, which is like a federated AI company, they're actually kicking off full pre-training across several of the different data DAOs. And so it's going to be a relatively small AI model, right? There are many caveats, but like, if you scale that up, you have a user-owned foundation model, right? All of the technical pieces are there. So I think that, the main takeaway there is that we can't be like marginal in the way that we think. It can't just be like, oh, okay, let's try to get a little bit, but it has to be like, okay, how do you take advantage of this massive amount of data capital and actually build a better like fundamental system for AI, on top of which you can build this whole kind of like self-sovereign data piece out.
Love that. Thank you for really unpacking this and getting into what makes the data in Vana so special. Congrats on what you're building so far, and looking forward to definitely keeping this conversation going, and really enjoyed it. Thanks again, Anna.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Well, there you have it. Thanks again to Anna Kazlauskas, co-founder of Vana. I am proud to have Vana as my partner for this podcast, as their mission is so perfectly aligned with the spirit of decentralized AI, or the people's AI. You can find links to Vana and Anna in the show notes. If this is your first time here at People's AI, please subscribe, forward to a friend, rate it 5 stars, all that good stuff. Thanks again. See you next time.